Welcome to the channel. This story happened in 1954 in Tokyo. A mysterious passenger stepped off the plane. It was a hot July day in Tokyo, 1954. The air above the scorched tarmac of Haneda shimmered like a mirage, and the sun hung high over the city, painting the sky in pale golden tones. At that moment, a passenger plane from Europe touched down at the airport. People hurried out of the cabin, weary from the long flight, moving with the rushed gestures that only seasoned travelers possess. So, Tokyo, July 1954. The sun seemed determined not to let the city rest for a single moment. The blazing heat wavered above the asphalt, and even the shadows cast by the buildings brought no relief. Haneda Airport buzzed like a massive beehive. Announcements in Japanese and English mingled with the roar of engines, the squeak of luggage carts, and the hum of voices. On the runway, a silver aircraft of a European airline rolled slowly. Its wheels touched the ground softly, but every passenger felt the cabin shudder as the metal giant finally embraced the Japanese soil. Tired from hours of flying, people reached impatiently for the exit. The wide gangway released a stream of figures in summer suits, dresses, and light hats. Some hurried, while others moved lazily, sluggishly, as if the heat had already drained all their energy. But one man stood out. He did not hurry. His steps were precise, rhythmic, as if measured in advance. Of medium height, about 175 centimeters, with a fit, disciplined posture that spoke of control and training. His light-colored suit fit him perfectly, as though freshly tailored. His white shirt was crisp, like the first snow, and his dark tie neatly knotted. Shiny black shoes gleamed on his feet. In his hand, he carried a leather briefcase the color of aged wine. Beside him, he rolled a suitcase with metal corners, slightly scuffed, yet clearly expensive. His face was well-proportioned, almost aristocratic, a high forehead, straight nose, lips of moderate fullness. But the most striking feature was his eyes. Gray-blue, piercing, with a strange cold glint, as if they were not merely observing the world around him but looking through it, into another, unseen dimension. The customs officers noticed him almost immediately. In the crowd, he seemed far too composed, far too calm. Other passengers rubbed their tired eyes, nervously searched for luggage, yawned, or whispered to each other. But this man walked as if everything happening around him were merely part of a familiar, practiced ritual. When he approached the customs counter, a young Japanese officer with a weary face took his passport. At first, everything seemed ordinary, standard questions, polite answers. The man spoke French, softly and with measured calm. His voice was deep, confident. When he heard the officers speaking Japanese, he switched to their language effortlessly, without an accent, with perfect intonation. This unnerved, and intrigued, the officials even more. But everything changed when the officer opened the passport. On the first page, in clear printed letters, it read, "The Kingdom of Taured." The officer froze. The man's first and last names were typical for a European, and the date of birth seemed entirely plausible. But the country? The country was unknown. He exchanged a quick glance with his colleague, then returned to the document. The stamps looked official, crisp, with no smudges. The pages contained visas from various countries, Spain, France, Japan. Everything suggested that the passport had truly passed through multiple customs checkpoints. The officer cleared his throat, trying to hide his unease. "Excuse me, you said you arrived on a business trip?" The man nodded, a faint smile on his lips. Yes, of course. I often come to Japan on business. I have meetings with partners in Tokyo. He spoke with such confidence that the thought of doubt seemed impossible. Soon, the document was in the hands of the senior officer. He raised an eyebrow, reading the country's name. Taured? He repeated in Japanese. The man nodded. Naturally. My kingdom has existed for hundreds of years. Haven't you heard of it? His words carried no hint of mockery. In his voice was genuine certainty. The senior officer cleared his throat slightly and signaled to his colleague. A strange chill grew inside him, something was wrong. Over his years of service, he had seen hundreds of forged documents, fake visas, clever imposters. But this case did not fit any familiar pattern. The passport was far too real. The man was invited into a small room with a low ceiling and a dim lamp hanging from above. The walls were pale green, smelling of tobacco and paper. A large world map lay on the table. Please show us where your country is, the senior officer asked. The man approached the table with confident steps. His eyes sparkled as he saw the map. He leaned over, traced his finger across Europe, and confidently pointed to the area between France and Spain. Here. The Kingdom of Taured. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. On the map, at the indicated point, lay only the small principality of Andorra. Excuse me, this is Andorra, one of them said. The man's face changed. The certainty in his eyes gave way to confusion. He leaned over again, traced his finger once more. But on the paper, his country did not exist. This cannot be, he whispered in French. His voice trembled for the first time. Taured should be here. It always has been. His gaze darted across the map as if hoping the borders might shift before his eyes. But the map remained unchanged. The officers began asking more questions. The man pulled out documents from his briefcase, a driver's license, bank checks, company business cards. Everything appeared genuine. Then he produced a stack of banknotes. The paper was thick, the stamps and designs intricate. But no one recognized the crests on the bills. This is the currency of my kingdom, the man explained calmly. It can be used at any bank in Europe. The officers exchanged glances again. One of them felt his heart beating faster. What was happening began to feel like a nightmare. The room grew stifling. The lamp above the table hummed softly. The man looked at the map once more, and this time, in his eyes was no certainty, only a nearly childlike fear. What has happened to me? He whispered. Evening fell over Tokyo slowly, as if the lingering heat refused to let go of the city. In the west, the sky turned a coppery red, and the sun seemed to melt across the horizon like liquid fire. Inside the airport halls, it grew quieter. Most flights had already arrived, the crowds had thinned. But in the small interrogation room, tension still hung thick in the air. The customs officers spoke in low whispers. Some insisted it was a mistake, a strange document, a poorly executed forgery, even a very skillful one. Others shook their heads, too many coincidences, too many details that could not be explained by mere fabrication. We cannot just let him go, said the senior officer, a man with a narrow face and wrinkles around his eyes. This case is beyond normal. We must isolate him, at least until morning. Fear was evident in the decision. Not fear of the man, but of what he represented. As if his very existence questioned the familiar world. The man from Taured was calmly informed of the decision. He did not argue. He merely sighed slightly, adjusted his tie, and said in perfect Japanese, "Very well. If it is necessary." His compliance surprised the officers. There was no irritation in his voice, only fatigue. As if this had happened to him before. The hotel where he was taken was close to the airport. A tall building in post-war architectural style, strict lines, narrow windows, floors tiled in dark stone. The corridors smelled of cheap tobacco and wood polish. He was given a room on the top floor. A small space, simple furniture, a bed with white sheets, a nightstand, a wardrobe, a writing desk. The window overlooked the runway. In the distance, the lights of the beacons flickered, and clouds slowly drifted across the sky, tinted by the moonlight. The door was locked from the outside. 2 guards were stationed at the entrance. The windows were checked, metal latches held the frame securely. The man silently surveyed the room. He took off his jacket, carefully hung it on the back of the chair, and opened his briefcase. He took out a leather-bound notebook and wrote for a long time with a thin black pen. His movements were deliberate, like those of someone accustomed to recording every evening, no matter the circumstances. Occasionally, he would lift his eyes and gaze out the window. The light of the airfield reflected in his face. In those moments, there was a melancholy in his gaze, the melancholy of someone looking not just at a foreign city, but at a foreign world. The guards whispered to each other. "He's strange, doesn't look like he's lying." "Yeah. Too calm. As if none of this concerns him." One of them admitted that upon meeting him, he felt a chill in his chest, as if the air around the stranger vibrated differently. The other shrugged but avoided making eye contact. That night, the hotel was eerily quiet. The hum of cars outside faded, even the wind seemed to still. It felt as if the entire world held its breath. Around midnight, the man from Taured closed his notebook and carefully placed it in his briefcase. He removed his tie, loosened his shirt collar, and sat by the window. His eyes were fixed on the distance, where the runway lights flickered. He murmured something to himself. The words were in French, but spoken so quietly that even if someone had eavesdropped, they would have been impossible to discern. At times, he pressed his hand against the glass, as if testing its reality. A few hours before dawn, the air in the room seemed to shift. The guards later reported hearing a faint crackling, like an electric discharge running behind the walls. One smelled ozone, sharp, fresh, like after a thunderstorm. But they did not dare enter. In the morning, the door was opened. The room was empty. The bed was made, but the suitcase had vanished, and the briefcase too. No notebook or papers remained on the desk. Even the clothes he had removed were gone. It was as if the man had never been there. Only one thing was left to unsettle them, a coin on the windowsill. Small, silver, with an unfamiliar crest. The emblem depicted a 3-headed eagle and an inscription in an unknown language. The metal felt cold, almost icy, though the sun had long since warmed the room. The officers inspected everything thoroughly. The window locks were untouched. No one had opened the door during the night. There were no signs of escape. The man had disappeared. The news spread quickly through the airport corridors. Some whispered about a spy, others about a madman. But those who had handled his passport knew it was something else entirely. Some officers could not forget the stranger's gaze. There was something in it that could not be explained by words. Confidence, as if he belonged to another world. And a sorrow, as if he had accidentally found himself here and was searching for a way back. The coin was placed in a safe. The documents vanished with him. Only stories remained, like echoes, passing from mouth to mouth. Thus was born the legend of the man from Taured. The man's disappearance caused a stir. In the first hours, the police and airport security kept everything secret, fearing a scandal. But by noon, investigators from the Tokyo authorities were involved. The hotel room was sealed. The walls and furniture were examined for fingerprints. Strangely, there were fewer than expected. On the door handle, only the guard's prints. On the desk where the man had written, nothing remained except a barely noticeable scratch, as if the pen had scraped off a thin layer of varnish. On the windowsill lay the coin, the same one, but it, too, seemed alien. Its metal resisted standard analysis, too pure, too uniform. No traces of escape were found. No hidden passages, no ventilation shafts, no tampered locks. It was as if the man had simply ceased to exist. The investigators discussed possible explanations. The most logical version seemed straightforward. Europe was living under the shadow of the Cold War, and the appearance of a man with unknown documents could easily fit into the picture of espionage. But why create a passport for a country that doesn't exist? For an experienced agent, that would seem utterly absurd. Some suggested the man might have been mentally unstable. Perhaps he suffered memory lapses or delusions. But then how could they explain the money, the documents, the language, and his disappearance? This version was never officially mentioned, but it lived in whispers. People who had held the passport said the document was real. The ink, the paper, the stamps, all appeared genuine. But the country did not exist. Therefore, he could have been from another world. Among the officers, some could not forget their encounter. A young customs officer, who had seen the passport for the first time, later admitted. When he looked at me, I felt as if there was no end behind his eyes. Like staring down a corridor that stretches into infinity. Another said, he didn't look surprised, more like offended that we didn't know his country. As if we weren't real, and he alone was. Even the senior officer, a man who had seen much in his career, confessed to a colleague over a cup of sake, if he was insane, then he was the sanest of all the madmen I've ever met. The news leaked within a few days. First, in the hotel corridors. The maids whispered about the foreigner who had vanished into thin air. Then, at the marketplace near the airport. They say he disappeared right out of a locked room. Whispered a fish vendor to her neighbor. Like a ghost. No, the Americans took him, the neighbor countered. A spy, probably. But the more the rumors spread, the more mystical the story became. In teahouses along the streets of Asakusa, people were already claiming he was a messenger from a parallel world. Old women in kimonos nodded. It's possible. Worlds intersect. Sometimes a door opens for a moment. Soon, even schoolchildren knew of the man from Taured. The coin remained the most tangible evidence. It was about the size of a Japanese yen, but slightly heavier. The emblem depicted a three-headed eagle holding a scepter and a sword in its claws. Around the edge, an inscription was engraved in the tiniest letters. No expert could read it. The language was unknown. The metal fascinated chemists, a silver alloy combined with something else, but its composition didn't match any known combination. The coin was placed in a safe, yet it became the subject of speculation. Some said it emitted a faint glow at night. Others claimed it chilled the hands like ice, even in summer heat. The officers questioned the hotel guards. "We sat by the door," one said. "Heard him walking around the room. Sometimes a chair would creak. Everything was calm. And closer to dawn." Asked the investigator. The guard frowned. "Closer to sunrise, we heard a crack. Like a lamp shorted. But the light didn't go out. And there was a strange smell. Like after a thunderstorm. And you didn't enter. We were under orders not to open the door." These words only further confused the investigation. A week later, the case was closed. Official documents stated, "Unknown foreigner. Circumstances of disappearance not established." The related documents were archived. The coin remained in the safe. The man's name was never published, for fear of scandal. But in the memory of those who had seen him, he remained forever. His gray-blue eyes, his calm voice, his certainty that Taured existed. Months passed. The story became a legend. In Tokyo bars, sailors told it as a tale. In universities, young philosophy students debated it, arguing about the possibility of parallel worlds. If he disappeared, then he must have returned home, one would say. Or perhaps he ended up in a third place, between worlds, another replied. And somewhere in this mixture of fear and admiration, a new mythology was born. The man from Taured became a symbol that our world is not so simple. When the man closed his eyes in his hotel room in Tokyo, his native world appeared before him. Not just a city, but an entire country, Taured, a place impossible to find on any map of Earth. He stood on a paved street, laid with gleaming gray-green stones that shimmered in the sunlight, as if each slab had been polished by the rain of millennia. The city's streets were narrow yet spacious, with arches and domes cast from silvery metal but adorned with wood and stone carvings. On the rooftops, the wind sang, creating a gentle melody, the music of Taured streets. People walked along the cobblestones, but they were unlike any humans he knew. Some had unusual eyes, bright green or amber, reflecting the light of the moon. Their clothing combined traditional fabrics with strange, iridescent materials that seemed alive. Men wore cloaks with metallic buttons, and women wore dresses with delicate embroidery that changed color with movement. The city was alive. Trees along the streets pulsed with soft light, their leaves shimmering like liquid gold. Birds he had known since childhood sang not just songs, their trills created harmonies that took one's breath away. He remembered the central city square, a massive domed tower of silver and blue glass, inside which floated transparent crystals. Each crystal contained knowledge, images of events, human histories, moments of nature. As a child, he loved watching the crystals change color with the seasons. "Good morning, my son," said an old teacher, approaching him. His eyes shone with a gentle light. "Today you must choose your path." The choice was important. In Taured, every person was born with a mark of destiny, but one's path was determined not only by societal laws but by the power of thought. Words, actions, decisions, all created the world, new branches of its reality. The man strolled through the city, remembering how each morning he ran along the streets to the river, where the water was clear but shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow. The river whispered in a language understood only by the people of Taured. He remembered the scents, a mixture of moss, rain, and the sweet aroma of crystals growing in the gardens. Markets surrounded him. Vendors sold not only food but strange artifacts, miniature mechanisms emitting smoke of various colors, books in which the words changed if the reader thought of something else, glass spheres reflecting the buyer's future for a few fleeting moments. He recalled the laughter of friends, who ran across rooftops, leaping from arch to arch as if it were easy and natural. In Taured, the laws of gravity were gentler, and the spirit of the city aided those who believed in themselves. And despite all the beauty, he remembered the anxiety. Every time he chose a path, he felt the fragility of reality, that it could be lost with a single mistake. And so it happened. He found himself in Tokyo, in a foreign world, but the memory of Taured remained alive. His heart ached as he recalled his home palace. A vast hall with marble columns, tall windows through which light fell, forming patterns on the floor. Behind him, he heard the whispers of advisors discussing strange events. The bridges between worlds are opening. He remembered how, as a child, he had heard the legend, that sometimes the people of Taured could cross the boundaries between worlds. But it was not easy. One had to be confident, courageous, and remember their home. And anyone who made a mistake would disappear for a time, returning to a foreign world or being lost forever. The man opened his eyes. Above him was the ceiling of a Tokyo hotel room. But his heart raced, his breath quickened. He saw the city that lingered in his memory and understood, his home still existed. There, in another dimension, Taured lived, breathed, pulsed. And somewhere there, he belonged to that world more than to Earth. The boy, the future man from Taured, had grown up among the silver streets and shimmering rivers of his homeland. His childhood was unlike any European one. Magic was present in every detail of the world, even the wind whispered stories, and every movement was bound by the law of thought. At the age of 10, he was sent to the School of Thoughts, a special place where they taught mastery over reality. Letters and numbers were not the main subjects. Attention, concentration, and the understanding that every action, every thought, creates the world around you, were. The halls of the school were tall, with transparent walls of crystal reflecting images of the past, present, and possible future. The teachers, wise elders, men and women whose eyes shone like gemstones, taught the children to feel the energy of Taured. Every choice creates a new branch, said one of the mentors, passing her hand over a crystal. Look, if you want to see the future, just ask a question and focus. But remember, you must not interfere with the branches of others. Otherwise, the consequences can be unpredictable. The boy learned quickly. His abilities amazed the teachers. He could see the slightest shifts in space, sense the movement of energy around people and objects. He realized that every object, every stone, every tree, was alive and responded to the attention of the one perceiving it. At 15, he first realized that the boundaries between worlds were not fixed. At a lake where the water shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow, he tried to send a small stone with his mind to another point on the shore. The stone vanished, and appeared exactly where he had directed it mentally. "Do you understand what you just did?" asked a mentor who appeared beside him, as if materializing from the air. "Yes, but it's impossible," the boy whispered. In Taured, much seems impossible only because you have not yet learned to control attention and belief. From that day, he practiced every morning and evening, moving objects, creating illusions, sensing events. But the hardest part remained understanding the boundary between his own world and a foreign one. The legends of Taured said that sometimes doors between worlds open. Not everyone could pass through them, only those who understood the nature of reality and the power of choice. One wrong step, and you will remain in a foreign world forever, warned one of the elders. Or lose all memory of your home. The boy long tried to imagine what a foreign world meant. He saw it as a mirror, similar, yet different. People there might resemble the inhabitants of Taured, but their cities, rivers, and skies would be unlike his own. Every step there would create a new branch of his life. It was during those years that he first felt a strange pull, an inner calling, drawing him to the points where worlds intersected. Sometimes at night, sitting by a window, he would see faint shadows moving through the streets of Tokyo in the past of Taured, barely visible, yet the outlines matched his own reality precisely. By the age of 16, he began training for the real crossing. In an old tower, in the underground halls where crystals held the memory of thousands of years, the boy learned to focus, to visualize a target, and to transfer himself mentally into another world. First, only your consciousness, the mentor gestured to the crystals. Think of the world you wish to enter. See with the eyes of the heart, not the body. He closed his eyes, breathed steadily, and tried to imagine being elsewhere, not here, but there. The first attempts ended in disappointment. His body remained, and the world did not change. But gradually, he began to feel vibrations, subtle oscillations in the space around him. Do you feel the door? Asked the mentor. Yes, like a gentle breeze, he replied. Good. But remember, the door does not stay open forever. And each time it opens, the world you came from remembers you. On his 18th birthday, he tried for the first time to pass through the door entirely. Standing on the paved street, he closed his eyes and focused on the point he had seen in his dreams, the place the calling had drawn him to. In the blink of an eye, the world around him changed, the street vanished, the crystals in the tower dissolved, and he found himself among unfamiliar buildings, under a foreign sun, in a bustling city full of unknown voices. He realized he had arrived on Earth, a reality similar to his own, but not his. The air smelled of metal and gasoline, the streets were gray, and people rushed by with briefcases, oblivious to the magic he had left in memory. The man felt fear for the first time. He understood that a mistake could prevent him from ever returning home. Yet at the same time, a sense of awe grew within him. This world was new, alien, but alive. And it was in this way, recalling Taured, that he once found himself in Tokyo in 1954, among people who had never heard of his country. When the man from Taured awoke in Tokyo, his internal compass was off. The city looked familiar, buildings, streets, posters, iron rails, but the colors were duller, the sounds less vibrant, and the air flat. He sensed that the world of his homeland did not breathe here. He observed the people. They walked quickly, with businesslike faces, ignoring one another. Their steps, their glances, everything was mechanical. In Taured, people felt the energy around them, heard the whispers of the wind, the music of crystals, and every encounter could change the course of the day. Here, no one looked around, no one noticed the strange movement of light or the barely perceptible oscillations of space. His first realization was that the body in this world obeyed the laws of gravity, which barely existed in his native Taured. Every step felt heavier, every movement required effort. Yet he retained inner clarity, thought could move faster than motion. The man tried speaking in Japanese, using the knowledge he had acquired in childhood. He knew that Tokyo's language was similar to what he had studied, but the pronunciation and intonations differed. Every conversation was a test, misunderstanding heightened his sense of strangeness. He entered a small restaurant near the hotel. Inside, the smell of fish and soy sauce hit him, and he immediately felt the difference from the sense of Taured. There, the air was always fresh, with hints of moss, rain, and sweet crystals. "Good afternoon," he said in Japanese, slightly accented. "What?" The waiter raised an eyebrow. "I would like to eat," the man said, pointing to a table. It took several minutes before he was understood. He smiled, strangely, almost unnaturally, because it was the first real interaction with a foreign world that had not ended in chaos. He understood internally, people here lived by their own rules, but his thoughts remained connected to Taured. Occasionally, when he looked at moving cars or pedestrians on the street, he noticed subtle oscillations in space, barely visible waves of light that seemed to respond to his attention. For several days, the man explored the city. Each evening, he returned to the hotel and wrote notes in a notebook he always kept with him. He recorded not only what he saw, but also sensations, movements of energy, strange coincidences, subtle vibrations. And one day, he noticed the first sign. On the wall of a building across from the hotel, reflected in the window, appeared a figure resembling himself. But it vanished whenever he blinked or turned his head. "This cannot be," he whispered. "These are signals." He realized that the boundaries between worlds were not entirely closed. Between Earth and Taured, there remained thin cracks, small doors that manifested in the slightest fluctuations of space. And if he could learn to use them, he might be able to return home. Every evening, the man would sit by the window and close his eyes, immersing himself in memories of Taured. He envisioned the streets, the crystals, the glowing trees, and the shimmering rivers. But his gaze always returned to Tokyo. Here, too, there was a world, there were people, events, and laws, but this was a world where boundaries were rigid and randomness was the norm. He began to feel a strange connection, not to people, but to space itself. When he concentrated, the streets subtly shifted, reflections in windows played with different patterns, and the sound of footsteps softened. Everything seemed like a faint shadow of Taured, present here but hidden from the eyes of ordinary inhabitants. The man understood, to return home, it required not only desire but complete focus, almost meditation. And any mistake could cost him the path back. On the third day in Tokyo, he noticed another strange sign. Walking down a narrow alley, the movement of the air around him seemed to freeze for a moment, as if the street had paused. Only he could feel it. And suddenly, a strange pale silhouette appeared before him, short, barely visible, like the shadow of his own world. The figure did not move, but its eyes looked directly at him. At that moment, the man realized that the crack between worlds had opened, even if only for a brief instant. "So, I can return," he whispered, his heart racing. He knew that to pass through the door, he had to prepare. He had to control his thoughts, resist fear, and focus precisely on Taured. Then he could vanish as suddenly as he had appeared here. At night, Tokyo was quiet. Only a few streetlights reflected in the hotel windows, and the faint hum of distant cars broke the silence. The man from Taured sat on the bed, eyes closed, holding a small crystal he always carried, a gift from his mentor in his homeland. The crystal was cold as ice, yet inside it shimmered with life, like a tiny sun. He concentrated, repeating to himself the sequence of thoughts learned in Taured, breathing evenly, body still, attention fully directed to the image of his native world. "I must do this now," he whispered, clutching the crystal. He recalled the streets of Taured, the shimmering rivers, and the glowing trees. Every detail had to be exact, a single error, and the passage through the crack would close forever. In the first hours, he began with small objects. A crystal on the table trembled slightly in his hands. He focused, sending it mentally to Taured. In an instant, the crystal vanished, barely noticeable, like a drop of dew disappearing from a leaf. "Good," he whispered. "The first step is done." He repeated the exercise several times. Each time, the object disappeared more precisely, returning only when he opened his eyes and released his concentration. Yet the danger was palpable in every movement. At that moment, he realized that someone, or something, was watching him. A subtle tremor appeared in the air of the room, as if invisible eyes were gliding along the walls. Every movement echoed with tension, as if the space around resisted. The man sat on the floor, closed his eyes, and inhaled deeply. He tried to silence fear, but every thought of failure sent a cold shiver through his chest. "If I fail, if I cannot return," the thought hung like a heavy stone. He imagined Tokyo, the street with the hotel, his room. Then he mentally expanded the walls, picturing the city as a vast map, and sensed a tiny, barely noticeable crack between worlds. There, beyond this reality, Taured shimmered. The crack was narrow, almost invisible. Yet he felt the warmth of his homeland's air, the scent of moss, the gentle rustle of crystals. His heart raced, he realized this was the only chance. Suddenly, the crystal on the floor trembled on its own. Its light intensified, spreading through the room and casting strange shadows on the walls. The man opened his eyes and saw a reflection, not his own, but a figure resembling him, standing by the window. "This is a signal," he exhaled. "It seems the door is open." He understood that the crack was ready to receive him. But to pass through, he needed total focus, complete control of thoughts and emotions. Any fear, doubt, or moment of distraction would close the passage. The man sat by the window, holding the crystal with both hands. He closed his eyes and began slowly repeating the sequence of breathing and visualization, each inhale, a vision of the streets of Taured, each exhale, the energy of the city, each movement of thought, the precise route home. The room seemed to freeze. The wind outside fell silent. The lamp hummed quietly. Even the air seemed heavier, tension hanging over every object. He felt a slight push, as if the space around his body shifted slightly. His heart beat faster. At that moment, he realized, this was the moment when the world of Tokyo and the world of Taured intersected. "Now or never," he whispered. Concentration reached its limit. He mentally stepped into the crack, feeling not just the room, but all the space between worlds. A slight shiver ran through his body, the crystal flared with bright light, and then. The night in the hotel was unusually quiet. Only the rare streetlights pierced through the blinds, casting stripes across the floor. The man from Taured sat by the window, holding the crystal, breathing steadily, thoughts focused. The room trembled barely perceptibly, as if the air was preparing for something extraordinary. The man felt a flow of energy slowly enveloping everything around him. The crystal's light intensified, flooding the walls with a soft silvery glow. "Now," he whispered. He took a mental step into the crack between worlds. In that instant, the sense of time vanished, everything froze. In the room, he simultaneously saw the reflection of Tokyo and flashes of his native Taured, streets, glowing trees, domes, and crystals. The slight shiver turned into a whirlwind. The crystal burst into blinding light, reflections on the walls shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow, and the air in the room hummed with a barely audible whisper, as if thousands of voices reminded him of home. Then, a moment of silence. He opened his eyes, and he was gone. The next morning, the officers on duty found the room empty. The bed was neatly made, the briefcase vanished, the notebook was not on the table. Only on the windowsill, bathed in sunlight, lay the very same coin with the three-headed eagle crest. The officers were baffled. The door locks were intact. The windows were closed. No trace of escape was found. "We should have seen something," muttered one officer. "But there is nothing," another shook his head. As if the man dissolved into thin air. The rumors spread instantly. At first among airport staff, then throughout the city. People whispered about the strange foreigner who had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a coin. With each passing day, the strange details grew even more enigmatic. The coin sometimes glowed faintly at night, and its metal felt cold even in the heat. In the hotel, a faint whisper could sometimes be heard, even though the corridors were empty. Windows reflected not only Tokyo, but fleeting flashes of light reminiscent of Taured's crystals. No trace of his disappearance existed, yet the memories of officers and townspeople became legend. Those who saw the man insisted that his eyes were not merely bright, they reflected another reality they could not comprehend. The man from Taured felt the familiar streets beneath his feet, heard the melody of the wind, and the murmur of crystals. He stood among the sparkling buildings, each detail of his native city welcoming his return. He inhaled deeply, the scent of moss, fresh water, and crystals, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly at home. Yet the memory of Tokyo remained. The world where he had been a stranger had now become only a memory, a faint shadow left on the boundary between worlds. Thus the legend was born. The story of the man who came from a country that does not exist and vanished, leaving behind only a coin and memories. Rumors about him were passed from mouth to mouth. In universities, students debated parallel worlds. In bars, tales were told of the mysterious foreigner. Archives stored documents no one could explain. The man from Taured became a symbol that our world is only one branch of reality, and that sometimes doors to other worlds can open, even when we do not notice. And who knows, perhaps one day he will return through that very crack. The story quickly became shrouded in whispers. Some considered it fiction, others a carefully hidden incident. But those who saw the man with their own eyes never forgot his face. His gaze, confident, cold, yet sorrowful, seemed to belong to someone who had accidentally glimpsed a foreign world, one that was not his home. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the thin boundary of dimensions, he returned to his Kingdom of Taured, a country that we will never find on any of our maps.